Should I use the new experimental AI features?
No.
Welcome to Telltales, an investing podcast hosted by Hunt Lawrence, Jason Wallace, and Mike Nicoletti. Each week, we discuss topics ranging from geopolitics and macroeconomics to energy and technology. You can sign up for our newsletter at telltales.us. That's TELLTALES.us for additional data and content you can use to follow along. The following conversation is intended for informational purposes only. You should always do your own work to determine if an investment is suitable for you.
Oh, on the dot, here he is.
Hi.
Hi, Hunt. Can you hear us?
Yes.
All
We got
right.
Jason.
I'm here. How's it going?
Hey, Jason, how you doing?
Pretty good.
Good. I feel like an idiot on Exhibit C on oil pricing, just since I said that, there's significant downside in case Saudi Arabia changed their policy. The oil's done nothing but go up. I think it's down today, but it got to 82 or 83 for WTI. I think the approximate cause of it going up is drones. In the time since last Wednesday, the Ukrainians figured out how to use drones to cause damage in 3 Russian refineries, hundreds of miles from their border. And that, I think, is the reason the price of oil stiffened. One of my friends who's from the business made another observation, and that is the Houthis have gotten awfully good at firing drones and I guess the missiles at ships trying to go through the Red Sea on their way to Suez Canal. 2 years ago or 3 years ago, they had a drone attack on Saudi Arabian facilities, which put the market up in a significant way. Obviously, the Houthis have gotten much better at using drones, and the Saudi oil facilities are well within the range of their equipment. But that doesn't mean that you don't have an oversupply situation. If you look at Exhibit C, U.S. was up a lot in 23, and it probably won't be up as much this year. This goes from 12.5 to 12.7. But Saudi Arabia is now not 9.3 in 24. They're down at 9. And the Russians will typically produce all they can. So the other one that stands out here is Iran's almost 3 million barrels. I think they're actually over 3 million barrels. And so the Biden administration's sanctions on Iran have really not curtailed Iranian production. So there's just too much oil. Otherwise, the Saudis would be at 11. If they made a decision to go to 11 to show everyone that they had lower costs, there would be some significant downside in oil. On natural gas, production is Exhibit B. Production is only running about 102 or 102 and a half. That's great, good news. That estimate for 24 of 104 looked like too low an estimate in November because production had gotten up to 104. Question is, how did production get from 104 to be running 102 or 102 and a half now? I think there's some shut-ins happening. In Waha, in West Texas, which is the hub for gas in West Texas, a day ago, if you had gas that you wanted to put in storage in Waha, you had to pay $1.30 to put it in storage. So I think faced with that, I think there is some amount of curtailment happening too. And so on a longer term basis, what it'll depend on is the rig count and the equipment levels. Both of those are down. So eventually we should get lower production. Toby Rice, who's the CEO of EQT, there's a CERA conference in Houston, made a point yesterday, and it's true. It's true. If you look down at power's gone 31, 33, 35 and a half, and then this forecast only goes up 37 and 38. that's actually more increase than LNG feed gas, which in 21 was under 11. It was just under 12 in 22, 13. So power use has been going up as fast as LNG exports. And if you look at power in the preceding years, it's pretty flat in the 31 area. So I think what has happened, there's a great deal more wind and solar out there, but wind and solar are intermittent. And I think what utilities are doing and industrial users are relying on gas from power. And that's important. Now, this particular forecast is actually pretty bullish. I mean, it has total surplus of supply over demand of 3 Bs a day in 23. It's $1 trillion on an annual basis. We only have just under 4 trillion of storage. That's an impossibly high number. Off this forecast, if that dry gas production stays at 104, you believe these demand numbers, it'll go down to 2, which is too much, but better than 3. And then it goes down to basically no surplus in 25. So the hope for natural gas recovering is exactly that. Turn to Exhibit A, and I guess they will finally finish the last of the 12 bills to run the government. They're the 24 fiscal year bills, and the 24 fiscal year started October 1 in 23, but they have at least gotten done. The Biden administration proposed right after the State of the Union, proposed a budget with $500 million more spending than last year. That budget will not happen, I don't think. So what we have to hope for as investors is that deficit kind of stabilizes at around 1.4. Now, you hear numbers for last year, 23 fiscal year, as high as 1.9, but the difference between 1.9 and whatever the cash number was is student loan forgiveness. So if it was 1.6 on a cash basis, and the U.S. is about to come out, or the U.S. Treasury is about to come out with their annual numbers, we'll update all these when that happens. But if it is going to be 1.6 trillion in 23, what would be absolutely terrific if it trended down in 24 and 25 by about 100 billion. Now, it's not a prediction, but it's not impossible. How will it happen? Well, curtailed spending, your automatic spending is your Social Security, your Medicare, your Medicaid. That can flatten out a little. It is possible. Then comes your defense spending. We're spending about $800 billion a year on defense. The problem is with our accumulated deficit and higher interest rates, we're spending almost that amount for interest. But that being said, if we can have a set of circumstances where the deficit is 1.6 when everything's properly adjusted for fiscal 23, and it goes 1.5 and 1.4, that would be, we still have way too much debt, but that would be progress. Anything to add, Mike or Jason?
The only thing I'd add is on the power front, we're seeing negative rates during the day in California. And that's kind of related, obviously, to the intermittent solar and in some cases wind production. So there's, more of those same issues, right? Except in the case of the subsidized solar, maybe some of those incentives and subsidies need to be repealed in the case of negative energy rates to balance things out a little bit.
Yeah. You probably don't have it's probably not warm enough for you and Jason. You probably don't have enough air conditioning demand to keep from having negative rates.
Not yet, no. I guess something I would add on the power front as well is there's been a lot of discussion by data center operators lately that power is going to be one of their bottlenecks. And Amazon has gone so far as to buy a data center and land directly adjacent to a nuclear power plant to build their next data center.
Yeah, data center uses a lot of power. Mm-hmm. I saw one analysis where the average data center, they keep getting bigger and bigger, needs 100 megawatts of power. Huge amount of power.
Right. Some forecasts have it using up to 7% of our power generation by 2030.
Yeah. While we have Jason on the line, Jason, will everyone want to buy the next generation of Apple iPhones if they're using the variant of Gemini, the Google large language model?
I don't know about
Right.
everyone, but I think it would be a big improvement. Siri hasn't seen an improvement in a long, long time, and it's by far the worst voice assistant on the market. So if they were able to put a language model behind Siri, that would be a huge improvement from where they're at.
Right. So being the default search engine we know from the litigation, Google paying Apple $20 billion a year or some number like that in 3 or 4 years from now, do you think there'll be a similar amount going from Google to Apple for Apple using Gemini rather than some other language model?
It depends.
Yes.
Because it depends on how they structure it, right? You got to figure that Apple's trying to figure out what do they want to do internally and what do they want to open up to developers. And in one sense, if Google could figure out how to monetize the Gemini model like they monetize search, then maybe Google would pay Apple. I don't think that's going to be the case right now because nobody's really figured that out yet.
You're thinking Apple will have to pay Google for use of Gemini?
Oh, I think in this first iteration, probably. At least they'd have to cover the compute. But I think at some point, they would want to open it up so the developers can pick. The trouble is they are so far behind with Siri. It has the potential of being a very good way to access and utilize your phone, but it does not work very well. So
I see an alternate scenario where Google's negotiating to have their Gemini model kind of pre-baked into whatever chip Apple is going to put in their new iPhone, so that app developers can have the same models running on an Android device or an iPhone. And Apple's probably going to support multiple language models, and I'm sure they'll have one of their own. So in that case, Google is definitely going to be paying to have that right.
How does Google monetize? I understand search, they make all that advertising revenue, but how do you monetize Gemini?
It's a great question.
So somebody's got to foot the bill for the power that goes into the data center that runs all the GPUs. So yeah, it's a question. I think there'll be a couple different angles that they'll take. And I think that one of them will be like, what's the main way that you interface with the iPhone? Another one will be, how do apps that operate on the iPhone, how do they get to operate with large language models or on device AI that's kind of custom hardware? So those are all the questions that we're looking for some answers from at the next WWDC Apple Developer Conference, which isn't far away, a month or two.
Jason, do you think Microsoft, it's a sign of weakness that they've hired the founder of DeepMind, which is acquired by Google,
I think
had his own startup, and now I guess he's given up on the startup and is going to work for whatever compensation Microsoft. Do you think that's a sign of weakness for Microsoft, or what do you think?
No, I think it's a sign of genius. I think it's a great move that they were able to pull that off. A couple of things in that, and we don't know the details yet on why and how it happened, but I think Inflection AI, they've raised a ton of $1.3 billion and spent a majority on that on Nvidia hardware. So Microsoft may have done this acquisition without calling it an acquisition to get a deal to license that hardware, since that's always in demand and a backlog from Nvidia. Also, they came out and said that they spent all their money and they spent a year and they didn't find a workable business model. So I think that, in my mind, solidifies the argument that the language models are a commodity, and the data is where the real value is. So they're getting a lot of talent around building these models, and then Microsoft has the data. So I think it's a big win for them to get a lot of talent in a competitive market.
Right. Do you think it makes AI more vulnerable, OpenAI? Microsoft has another way to proceed.
In a way, it does. Certainly, they're less reliant on the engineers from the OpenAI team. When Sam Altman was unceremoniously removed from his CEO role and kicked out of the company, they attempted to hire all the staff. So right. I think that they'd love to have everyone in-house, but they probably just couldn't acquire these companies.
Right.
I'd also say I think that Microsoft actually, and maybe even senior leadership at OpenAI, believe that there's not actually value in the models. You need the models, but at the end of the day, it's going to boil, longer term, it's going to boil down to data. And differentiated data is going to determine whether and how useful a particular model is. So, which would be the only reason that would explain why Sam Altman doesn't have any equity compensation in OpenAI, right? So I think that's a vision that they share from some extent.
Right. Jason, Mike and I were speculating, and Mike was saying that Gemini ran into all that trouble and made Google look kind of incompetent. But he did say the Gemini model, let's see if I can repeat these words, could take 1 million tokens. Understand a token is 1 or 2 words of input.
Yeah, I think that is an impressive part of that technology. The more information you can put in, the better context, the answer that the model can give you in return. If you wanted to summarize a PDF or an article, most of the models can do that. But if you wanted to write, a short synopsis of a book, I think you'd have to go to Gemini for that kind of thing.
Well, and the really fascinating part about that is that the compute does not scale linearly, right, to do this. And that's where Gemini's done something, or Google's team has done something different in their approach. And there's a couple theories out there as to how they did it, and maybe at some point they'll release how they did. And so it's exciting in that we're still in the very early innings of figuring out how to use the technology.
Well, and it's interesting to see different teams are prioritizing different aspects of it to optimize. So in one day that converges, and we'll have a model that gives you fantastic answers, doesn't hallucinate, and can take all the information you want to give it.
Right. We've got to save time for healthcare, but a few minutes on the new equipment announced by Nvidia, and also their stance. I mean, it sounds to me like they want to make it clear that their sale of CPUs is not just going to be dependent on how much the cloud companies need, how much Microsoft needs and Amazon needs, that they see a much wider market for their GPUs. But in order to save at least 5 minutes for healthcare, why don't you lead us through that logic, Jason?
This will be tough. They announced a lot of stuff. There's a lot of interesting data in that presentation. The chips themselves are 2.5 times faster, and then they've put in some optimizations on doing inference specifically of language models. So they optimized around language models, and they're able to produce answers that are in 30 times faster than the current generation of chips. So it kind of it front runs the Grok chip that everyone was saying was orders of magnitude better, and they're capable of that. Mike and I had a suspicion that last year when they announced their chips, they were kind of sandbagging a little bit because there's no competition there. So I think this year they're showing where the technology really is. And a lot of advancements went into this chip, and specifically the one that I think builds a bigger moat or a second really big moat besides CUDA is their specific NVLink networking. So the networking between these GPUs and then between the servers in a single rack is pretty fantastic. So you can put multiple GPUs in one server. They're connected fast enough that they think they're one. And then you can connect multiple servers where the connection, the data connection between them is fast enough that you can view all of the GPUs among all the servers as one giant processing unit. And that's pretty revolutionary. And I don't think any other technology is up to that level. And this is from the Mellanox acquisition, and it's genius now.
Right. Well, and the other thing to add is the new GPU is on the exact same process technology as the last one.
Right.
You know, slightly enhanced or whatever, but it's still 4 nanometer. So they doubled the size by basically taking 2 GPUs and gluing them together with their onboard networking. But then also all of these Mellanox-based enhancements. It just shows that they have many knobs to turn, and it's nice to not have to go to Taiwan Semiconductor and say, be beholden to them and them being the only ones that can do the latest process technology. They can turn some of these other knobs.
Yeah. And one of the reasons why this is important is the language models are large, hence the large in the name. And they all have to fit, the whole thing has to fit into memory. And one single GPU with its onboard memory can't hold the model. So I believe it was 8 GPUs had to be networked together to hold one model. And this is just an example of how they can do that better than anyone else.
Well, we promised each Wednesday to save some time for healthcare. We'll save more time next Wednesday because we'll probably have less chip and software news. But this is page 15. And we do have some other healthcare companies on other pages. And Mike and Jason are spending a significant amount of time on healthcare. So there may be, in the next few weeks, some additional healthcare companies. But on page 15, the ones that Mike and Jason have spent the most time on and the ones we spent the most time looking at are Lantheus and Vertex. So I guess, Mike, why don't you take Lantheus and Jason take Vertex?
I guess we don't really have any new news on Lantheus's front, aside from the management transition. The new news in that industry in general is that another radiopharmaceutical company was acquired, announced, I think it was earlier this week. So the space continues to be exciting. It seems to be, we kind of identified this before, there's a lot of larger biotechs, Pfizer, Biogen, some of these other ones that have a lot of blockbuster drugs facing patent cliffs that are looking for places to replace their revenue with. And it seems like radiopharma is a pretty exciting place to be. So we don't have any new data readouts from when we've talked about Lantheus last, but the long story short is their Pylarify diagnostic that's used for prostate cancer is leagues above the rest and very, very quickly became standard of care. That was a really interesting deal for them because they acquired a company who had lost a patent battle with Novartis. And they acquired that company, appealed the decision, and won. And in the first year, they made more in revenue than the acquisition price. So it was kind of one of those, it was kind of David and Goliath-esque, I guess. So I thought that was pretty cool. So we like the business they're in. We like the radiopharmaceutical space. It's gaining more traction, especially in the U.S. And then the exciting part is pairing these, not just diagnostics, but also doing therapeutics with radiopharmaceuticals. So currently, Novartis has a treatment. And then the exciting one is BNT2002, which we're expecting more data on. The initial data read somewhat disappointed some analysts because of some of the peculiarities in the trial. So we're looking forward to additional data coming from there. But until then, we're kind of just sit and wait.
Yeah, I would just add that there's the treatment for prostate cancer is a much more competitive market. But as new cutting edge treatments do come to market, it just drives more and more demand for their diagnostic. So regardless of their treatment making it to market, we think the diagnostic business is worth it.
It's a really good point, Jason, because the way what we've honed in on and what we like about different healthcare biotech companies is if we can find something that has a durable cash flow and then is either returning that cash flow to shareholders or finding innovative ways to invest it. We think that most biotechs do a pretty poor job of the latter, of the reinvesting cash flows after they've had a blockbuster of some sort. We're hopeful that Lantheus is one of the ones that does a good job reinvesting those cash flows.
Right. And Jason, Vertex Pharmaceutical, people are really waiting on that pain medicine.
Yep, we are too.
Yeah, like glacial.
Not much in healthcare is fast. But I guess the only update in that space is a number of states now, I think it's up to 6 or 7, have passed laws that if you're going to prescribe a patient an opioid, to take home, essentially, you have to give them some consultation on the downsides of taking opioids and give them alternatives to choose from. So that's good news for them. And I think that'll kind of spread nationwide as we face this opioid epidemic.
Right. And then Vertex Pharmaceutical on its own is very successful. I mean, their cash flow is terrific.
Definitely.
And, yeah.
Yeah, again, another example of a company that has some durable cash flows in another area. In the case of Vertex, it's in cystic fibrosis, CF. And they've just out-innovated themselves and become the dominant provider there. Really amazing, bringing life expectancy for someone with CF from the 30s into the 70s. So,
Right.
The Biontech had earnings this morning.
Uh-huh.
And they were disappointing in the sense that, we weren't surprised, but the COVID vaccine sales were lower than expected by a wide margin. We kind of look at it as like they have this cash pile, and what are they doing with it, and how is their pipeline advancing? They do have a lot of, and Mike and I were talking about this earlier today, is that they do have a lot of mRNA cancer vaccines in the works, but they're all in phase 2. So they're years away from the market if they do successfully pass through phase 3. But they've spent some of that money to buy some antibody drug conjugate treatments that are further along. They're in phase 3. They are treatments for lung cancer and breast cancer. So huge markets. And they're kind of maybe chasing the shiny object with antibody drug conjugates, but if they can get them to the market, it could be a good revenue stream.
Yeah, that's the challenging thing. Is it seems like they just had so much money, and now they're just chasing anything to replace some revenue. It seems like maybe are spread too far and wide. But having made the decision to reinvest all the cash flow rather than return it to shareholders, having made that decision already, the question that an investor needs to come to grips with is, do you like the pipeline? Do we feel like the probability of that pipeline, the future cash flows from those investments are just going to pay out? And, we still scratch our heads on that one.
Right. Good. Well, I think we've run out of runway, but we promise next week to spend an extra 5 minutes at the end on healthcare. In the meantime, everyone stay well and stay healthy. Talk to you Wednesday. Take care.